Everything you think you know about how to think, how to argue, and how to understand the world around you actually comes from one man who lived over 2,000 years ago. If you've ever used logic to win an argument or looked at a plant and wondered how to classify it, you are walking in the footsteps of a giant who quite literally invented the way the modern mind works. Most people recognize his name, but very few realize that without him, the scientific revolution might never have happened, and the greatest empire in history might never have been built. This is the story of Aristotle, the man who was so influential that for centuries, scholars didn't even call him by his name. They simply called him the Philosopher. We're going to look into the life of a man who was born on the edges of the civilized world, moved to the heart of intellectual power, and ended up teaching the most famous conqueror to ever live. We will explore how he broke away from his famous teacher Plato to create a new way of seeing reality, one based on what we can touch, see, and measure. By the end of this, you'll see that Aristotle isn't just a figure from a dusty history book, he is the architect of the very software your brain uses to process reality every single day. To understand Aristotle, we have to go back to the year 384 BC. He wasn't born in Athens, the famous center of Greek culture. Instead, he was born in a small coastal town called Stagira, located in the northern part of Greece. This is a crucial detail because it meant Aristotle was always a bit of an outsider. His father, Nicomachus, was the personal physician to the king of Macedonia. This meant that from the time he was a small boy, Aristotle was surrounded by the talk of medicine, anatomy, and the physical world. While other kids were playing with wooden swords, Aristotle was likely watching his father dissect specimens or discuss the humors of the body. This early exposure to biological science planted a seed that would grow into a lifelong obsession with how things work on a physical level. When Aristotle was about 17, he traveled to Athens. At that time, Athens was the place to be if you wanted to be anyone in the world of ideas. He joined the academy, which was the most famous school in the world, run by the legendary Plato. Imagine being a teenager and walking into a classroom where the teacher is Plato himself. For 20 years, Aristotle stayed at the academy. He went from being the star student to a teacher in his own right. He was so bright that Plato reportedly called him the mind of the school. But as the years passed, a massive tension began to grow. Plato believed that the real world was a world of perfect ideas and forms that we couldn't see. Aristotle, perhaps because of his doctor father, started to disagree. He believed that if you wanted to find the truth, you didn't look up at the sky or into your own imagination. You looked down at the dirt, the plants, and the animals right in front of you. This disagreement created one of the most important splits in human history. There is a famous painting by Raphael called The School of Athens. In the center, you see Plato and Aristotle walking side by side. Plato is pointing his finger up to the heavens, suggesting that truth is found in a higher spiritual realm. Aristotle, however, has his hand held out flat, palm down, pointing toward the earth. This gesture perfectly captures his entire philosophy. He was telling the world, look at what is here, use your senses, observe, categorize, measure. When Plato died, many expected Aristotle to take over the academy. But because of his differing views, and perhaps because he was still seen as a foreigner from Macedonia, he was passed over for the job. Instead of staying and moping, Aristotle did something brave. He left Athens. He traveled to the island of Lesbos and the coast of Asia Minor. This was a turning point. Freed from the shadow of his master, he began his own research. He became a pioneer of empiricism. This is just a fancy way of saying he believed that knowledge comes from experience. He spent years walking along the beaches, cutting open fish, watching how birds nested, and documenting everything. He wasn't just thinking about life. He was investigating it with his own two eyes. He was the first person in history to truly act like a modern scientist. He realized that before you can explain why something happens, you have to accurately describe what is happening. One of Aristotle's greatest gifts to humanity was the invention of formal logic. Before him, people argued and debated, but there were no rules for how to do it correctly. Aristotle changed that by creating something called the syllogism. It's a simple three-step process that we still use today. It goes like this: all humans are mortal. Socrates is a human. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. It sounds simple, right? But by laying out these rules, Aristotle gave us a tool to spot lies and bad arguments. He showed us that if your starting points are true and your logic is solid, your conclusion must be true. He systematized thinking the way a librarian organizes books. He wrote the Organon, a series of books that served as the manual for human reasoning for nearly 2,000 years. But he didn't stop at logic. Aristotle was the father of biology. He classified over 500 species of animals. He was the first to notice that dolphins and whales were mammals, not fish, because they gave birth to live young. This was a revolutionary observation that wouldn't be fully appreciated for centuries. He looked at the world and saw a giant puzzle. He wanted to know the four causes of everything. If you see a wooden table, Aristotle would ask, what is it made of? That's the material cause. What is its shape? That's the formal cause. Who made it? That's the efficient cause. And most importantly, what is it for? That's the final cause, or what he called teleology. He believed that everything in nature has a purpose. An acorn's purpose is to become an oak tree. A human's purpose is to use their reason to live a good life. This idea that the universe has an inherent order and purpose became the foundation for both science and religion in the West. In 343 BC, Aristotle received an invitation that would change the course of history. King Philip II of Macedonia invited him to come back north to tutor his son, a 13-year-old boy named Alexander. Think about this for a second. The greatest mind in the world was hired to teach the boy who would become the greatest conqueror in the world. Aristotle didn't just teach Alexander how to read and write. He taught him ethics, politics, and science. He gave Alexander a copy of Homer's Iliad, which the young prince reportedly slept with under his pillow for the rest of his life. Aristotle instilled in Alexander a deep curiosity about the world. It is said that when Alexander was off conquering the Persian Empire, he sent back biological samples and scrolls from distant lands for his old teacher to study. While Alexander was busy redrawing the maps of the world with his sword, Aristotle was redrawing the maps of human knowledge with his pen. This relationship between the philosopher and the king is one of the most fascinating what-ifs in history. How much of Alexander's vision for a unified global empire came from Aristotle's teachings on politics and the shared nature of humanity? Even though they eventually had a falling out as Alexander became more like a tyrant, the impact was permanent. Aristotle's ideas traveled on the backs of Alexander's horses to every corner of the known world, from Egypt to India. Eventually, Aristotle returned to Athens and set up his own school called the Lyceum. Unlike the academy, which was very exclusive, the Lyceum was more like a research center. Aristotle had a habit of walking while he taught, leading his students through the covered walkways of the school. Because of this, his followers were called the Peripatetics, which basically means the walkers. Here, he turned his powerful mind toward the question of how we should live. He wrote a famous book called the Nicomachean Ethics, named after his son. In this book, he introduced the concept of the golden mean. He argued that virtue is always a balance between two extremes. For example, if you are too afraid, you are a coward. If you are not afraid of anything and do stupid things, you are reckless. But if you find the perfect balance in the middle, you have the virtue of courage. He applied this to everything. Generosity is the balance between being stingy and being a spendthrift. He believed that happiness, or eudaimonia, isn't a feeling like joy. It's an activity. It's the result of a lifetime of practicing these virtues and reaching your full potential. He also looked at politics, famously stating that man is by nature a political animal. He studied the constitutions of over 150 different Greek city-states to figure out which government worked best. He didn't believe in a perfect utopia like Plato did. He wanted to find the most practical system that actually worked for real, messy human beings. Despite his genius, Aristotle faced a massive problem. He was trying to explain the entire universe using only his eyes and his brain, without the help of telescopes, microscopes, or modern math. This led him to some conclusions that we now know are wrong. He believed the Earth was the center of the universe. He thought that heavier objects fell faster than lighter ones. He even had some very backward views about women and slavery that reflected the prejudices of his time. But here is why he still matters. Even when he was wrong, his method was right. He taught us to ask questions, to collect data, and to try to build a logical system. He faced the challenge of a chaotic world and tried to find the hidden laws that governed it. When the Roman Empire fell and Europe entered the Dark Ages, much of Aristotle's work was lost to the West. It was preserved and expanded upon by brilliant Islamic scholars like Avicenna and Averroes. When his books were finally translated back into Latin in the 12th and 13th centuries, they hit Europe like a lightning bolt. They sparked the scholastic movement and laid the groundwork for the Renaissance. Scientists like Galileo and Newton had to argue against Aristotle's specific findings, but they used the very logical tools he invented to do it. You can't even disagree with Aristotle without using the logic that Aristotle gave you. As we look at the legacy of this man, it's hard to overstate his reach. If you go to medical school, you are following his lead in anatomy. If you study law, you are using his rules of evidence and logic. If you write a screenplay, you are likely following the rules of drama he laid out in his book, Poetics. He was a man who wanted to know everything about everything. He didn't see science, art, and ethics as separate things. He saw them as different parts of the same quest to understand what it means to be alive. Aristotle died in 322 BC, shortly after the death of Alexander the Great. He had to flee Athens again near the end of his life because the city turned against anyone associated with Macedonia. He said he left because he didn't want the city to sin against philosophy a second time, referring to the execution of Socrates. Even in his final days, he was thinking about the big picture. He left behind a body of work that would serve as the textbook for the human race for 2 millennia. He taught us that the world is knowable. He taught us that our minds are capable of grasping the secrets of the stars and the secrets of our own hearts. He was the first person to truly organize the world, and in doing so, he gave us the keys to build the modern age. Aristotle was more than just a philosopher. He was the first true scientist and the architect of Western thought. From his early days in Stagira to his time at the Academy, his years tutoring a future king, and the founding of the Lyceum, his life was a relentless pursuit of truth through observation. He gave us the tools of logic, the foundations of biology, and a blueprint for ethical living that still resonates today. He showed us that by observing the smallest leaf, we can begin to understand the largest truths of the universe. He believed that excellence is not an act, but a habit, a lesson that remains as powerful now as it was 24 centuries ago. His shadow looms over every library, every laboratory, and every courtroom in the world. To understand Aristotle is to understand the very roots of who we are as thinking beings. If you found this deep dive into the mind of the man who organized the world fascinating, there is so much more to explore. Our journey through history is just beginning, and the stories of the people who shaped our world are waiting to be told. Subscribe to History Memory Chronicles for more historic deep dives. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode, like this video if you learned something new, and share it with someone who loves a good story. What do you think is Aristotle's most important legacy? Let us know in the comments below. Watch this next video on your screen to keep exploring the secrets of the past.